Show Carla holding the faded photograph with a voiceover. 16 years ago, a crime shook the art world. Was it love, betrayal, or something darker? The morning sun was sharp and bright, casting long, angled shadows across the prison yard as Carla stood frozen before the cold, gray bars of her mother's cell. 16 years had passed since the tragic night of the murder, yet for Carla, time had not softened the edges of the past. It had only sharpened them, filling her with more questions, more doubt. In her trembling hand, Carla clutched the faded photograph, its edges curled and fragile from years of being handled. Amyas Crail, her famous artist father, and her mother Caroline, both laughing in a moment of happiness that now felt so distant it could have been a dream. Carla's gaze shifted between the photo and the woman before her, locked away behind iron bars. Her mother, silent and withdrawn, wearing the same haunted expression that had been etched into her face since that fateful night. Carla's voice, barely above a whisper, broke the stillness. "Mummy didn't kill him. I know she didn't." Her words felt like an anchor, a plea to herself more than a statement. She spoke with such certainty, but the prison walls seemed to close in tighter, each echo of her voice filled with a haunting question she could not answer. Caroline's eyes, dull and tired, lifted to meet Carla's gaze, but there was no reassurance there. No spark of belief, only the deep weight of years spent in isolation and regret. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her face was a mask of sorrow, a woman who had lost everything: her freedom, her husband, her reputation, yet still, some flicker of something remained in her gaze. It was that flicker Carla clung to, the faint hope that there was something, someone, who could prove her mother's innocence. Carla's hand tightened around the photograph, her fingers pressing hard into the worn edges of the paper. "I'll find the truth, Mummy. I swear it. I'll find the truth. We can't live like this forever." But Carla knew there was only one man who could help her. She turned away from the cell, her heart beating faster, a mixture of dread and anticipation twisting in her chest. She knew where she had to go, who she had to turn to: Hercule Poirot, the world-renowned detective, whose sharp mind had solved countless mysteries. If anyone could untangle the lies and confusion surrounding her father's murder, it was him. As she walked away from the prison, the air felt thick with the weight of the past. Carla's footsteps echoed on the stone floor, the sound almost oppressive, as though the very walls were whispering secrets she was yet to understand. The photograph she clutched so tightly seemed to burn in her hands, a symbol of everything she had, lost everything she still wanted to believe in. Cliffhanger ending. Just as Carla reached the prison gates, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the message. "I know what you're planning. Don't go to Poirot. You'll regret it." A chill ran down Carla's spine. She stared at the words, her mind racing. Who had sent this, and why? The air around her felt suddenly colder, the world spinning with possibilities. Carla's breath quickened as she looked over her shoulder, but no one was there. A flicker of movement in the distance caught her eye, but it vanished before she could make sense of it. Was someone watching her? Without a moment's hesitation, she stuffed the phone back into her pocket, her mind set on one thing: finding Poirot no matter what. But the question remained: who wanted her to stop, and why? With her heart pounding in her chest, Carla stepped out into the bright morning, the shadows of doubt growing longer with every passing second. And as the gates closed behind her, a voice echoed in the silence, one that would haunt her as she took the first step towards the truth. "The past never lets go, Carla. It never lets go." The soft thud of the train's wheels on the tracks was the only sound that filled the air as Carla and Hercule Poirot made their way to the grand estate. A sense of anticipation, a mix of dread and hope, hung heavily in the silence between them. Carla, despite the weight of the case pressing down on her, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Poirot's calm presence seemed to cut through the tension, his sharp eyes missing nothing, yet offering no comfort. He was a man of logic, not of promises. They arrived at the estate as the afternoon sun bathed the sprawling grounds in an amber glow. The house loomed before them, an imposing monument to a life once full of passion, now shadowed by murder and suspicion. The windows, dark and lifeless, looked like eyes that once saw a world of brilliance, now blind to everything except the pain of the past. Poirot stepped out of the carriage, his polished shoes making a soft click against the cobblestones as he turned to Carla. His face remained impassive, but there was an unmistakable glint of intrigue in his eyes. "Ah, mademoiselle, it is here that everything began. The murder, the deceit, the ruin, and now perhaps the truth." Carla nodded, her throat dry, her eyes scanning the mansion that had once been a place of beauty, now haunted by shadows of grief. "This is where he died, where my father was murdered." Poirot gave a small nod, his mind already at work. He took a step forward, his gaze sweeping over the estate as though it held the answers to 1,000 unspoken questions. As they entered the mansion, the smell of old wood and faded paint greeted them, mingled with the faint scent of something, still lingering from that night. The silence in the house was deafening, the weight of its memories pressing down on them. Each room they passed seemed to breathe with the echoes of the past. The grand staircase, where Amias had been found. The painting gallery, where his works once shone brightly, each canvas now a monument to a life cut short. But it was the studio that drew Poirot's attention. He stepped inside with a slow, deliberate pace, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. The easels, the paintbrushes, the unfinished canvases, all of it frozen in time. Poirot muttered, the words rolling off his tongue like a riddle. "Not everything is as it seems." Carla's eyes flicked nervously between him and the room, a cold shiver running down her spine. "What do you mean?" Poirot's gaze lingered on the unfinished painting of a woman who resembled Caroline, but the expression was all wrong, as though the artist had captured something else entirely. He stepped closer, his gloved hand brushing the canvas, as if searching for something hidden beneath the layers of oil paint. "The emotions of the artist are woven into the brushstrokes," Poirot mused. Amias Kral, the man who lived in a world of beauty, but also a man filled with jealousies, rivalries, and passions, a man who could inspire love and hatred. Carla's heart skipped a beat. "Do you think?" Poirot raised a finger to his lips, his gaze shifting to the window, where the light flickered as clouds passed overhead. "I think, mademoiselle, that this is no ordinary murder. And what is more, I think that whoever did this has played a game so clever, so carefully constructed, that even the best of us may fail to see the truth until it is too late." As they moved through the estate, Poirot's keen eyes absorbed every detail, noting the smallest of clues, the slight scuff marks on the floor, the position of the furniture, the faint scent of perfume lingering in the air, a scent that was far too familiar. It was a signature, one that no one would have noticed but him. Poirot paused before the staircase, his eyes narrowing. There was a struggle here. Not the kind of struggle you would expect from a woman trapped in a moment of passion. No, mademoiselle, this was something else. A well-orchestrated performance. A plan. Carla's stomach twisted with unease. "What do you mean?" Poirot's gaze was piercing. "The truth hides in plain sight, but it is masked by deception. Whoever murdered Amias Kral did not do so out of a fit of rage. They did so out of necessity." A sound from the upper floor caught their attention, a soft creak of a door, followed by a hushed murmur, as if someone was watching them from the shadows. Carla froze, her breath catching in her throat. Poirot's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes flicked to the staircase, his fingers tightening around the walking cane he always carried. "Someone is here," he said, his voice low and steady. "But who?" Carla's pulse raced, her hand instinctively reaching for the doorframe for support. She had expected the past to be full of ghosts, but not like this, alive, present, and dangerous. Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the darkened upper floors. "We must be careful now, mademoiselle. The truth is not just hidden, it is guarded, and whoever is watching us is playing their own game." The moment seemed to stretch, the silence suffocating, until a door on the second floor creaked open, and a figure emerged from the shadows, their face half concealed by the darkness. Carla's breath hitched in her chest. Poirot's expression didn't change, but his words were a warning, sharp and steady. "The game is afoot." and it is more dangerous than you realize. Cliffhanger ending. The figure on the staircase took a step forward, their silhouette coming into clearer view. Yet the identity remained hidden. A chill ran down Carla's spine as she realized they were not alone, and worse, this was not a coincidence. Poirot's voice broke the tension. "We are being watched, mademoiselle. But the question is, who is playing this dangerous game and what do they know?" The figure froze, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still. Then, in a voice Carla barely recognized, a whisper carried down the stairs, "You shouldn't have come here." And just like that, the room grew colder, the shadows darker. Poirot's eyes gleamed with a knowing, dangerous light. The truth had just taken a deadly turn. Who was the figure? And what had they seen? The mystery was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The suspects. The small, quaint village near the Creole estate was eerily quiet as Poirot and Carla made their way through the cobbled streets, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The air felt thick with tension, as if the very earth beneath their feet held the secrets of a tragedy long buried. The first stop on their investigation was to speak with Caroline Creole, the woman who had spent years in prison for the murder of her husband. They arrived at a small, nondescript cottage. The garden, overgrown with ivy, was a stark contrast to the grand estate they had just left behind. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old books and dust. Caroline sat in a chair by the window, her once beautiful face now marked by years of solitude and regret. Her eyes, hollow and distant, flickered with recognition as she saw her daughter. Carla stepped forward, her voice a whisper. "Mum, I need to know the truth. You didn't kill him, did you?" Caroline's lips trembled as she spoke, her voice barely audible. "I wish I could say it wasn't me, Carla, but I can't. The evidence, it was all against me. The whole world thought I killed him, and I still don't know if I can prove otherwise." Poirot observed silently from the corner, his piercing eyes watching Caroline closely. There was something in her voice, a note of sorrow, but also something deeper. Guilt? Fear? Or was she hiding something more? He stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "Madame Creole," Poirot began, his accent cutting through the thick silence, "it is clear to me that you carry the weight of this tragedy. But one thing is certain. The truth is never as simple as it seems. We will uncover what happened on that day. But I must ask, what of your husband's enemies? Could there have been anyone who wanted him dead?" Caroline's eyes darted away, as though the question cut too deep. Amias had many admirers, but also enemies. A man like him, with such a fiery spirit, makes enemies wherever he goes. Poirot nodded, noting the hesitation in her tone. "Thank you, Madame Creole. We shall speak again." Next, they visited Elsa, Amias's young lover, who had been the source of much gossip and speculation. Her cottage was small but vibrant, with flowers spilling over the windowsill, a stark contrast to the dark cloud of suspicion that hovered over her. When they arrived, Elsa was sitting by a fire, a glass of wine in hand. Her fiery red hair, once the symbol of her passionate affair with Amias, now seemed to mirror the intensity of her emotions. Carla's hand tightened into a fist as she entered. "Elsa," she said, her voice trembling, "did you love him?" Elsa's eyes were a mixture of defiance and sorrow. "Of course I loved him," she said, her voice steady but with an edge. "But that doesn't mean I killed him. No, I didn't kill Amias. But someone else did, someone who wanted to take him away from me." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You loved him, yet you were also jealous of others who were close to him. Is it possible that your love turned into something darker? A passion so fierce it led to something unforgivable?" Elsa's expression hardened, and she shot a glance at Carla before speaking. "I didn't kill him, but I know what it feels like to lose someone you love. Don't think I didn't know about the others. The other women in his life." Poirot watched her closely, his mind calculating the angles. "Yes, madame, your jealousy is a powerful force, but is it enough to make someone commit murder? Perhaps. Or perhaps there is something more, something we have yet to uncover." With that, they moved on to Philip Blake, Amias's closest friend, and the one who should have known him best. Yet, the more Poirot heard about Philip, the more he felt a sense of unease. Philip's resentment towards Amias was known. Amias's success, his marriage, his talents, everything Philip wanted but could never have. They found Philip in a dimly lit office surrounded by papers and old photographs. He greeted them with a tight smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Philip Blake," Poirot said, his voice calm but filled with sharpness. "You were a close friend of Amias Crowell. But I must ask, did you resent him?" Philip looked away for a moment, his jaw clenching. "Resent him? Number, I respected him. But he had everything. Everything I ever wanted. His talent, his wife, his life. He could do no wrong in the eyes of the world." Carla's eyes flashed with suspicion. "Are you saying you had no motive to harm him?" Philip's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "Motive? Perhaps not. But don't think I wasn't angry. You think I didn't see how everyone adored him? How he took everything I ever wanted?" Poirot's eyes flickered as he studied Philip's words. A man full of bitterness, a man who would do anything to change his fate. "Would you be capable of murder, Monsieur Blake?" Philip's gaze sharpened, but he said nothing. Finally, they visited Miss Violet Marsh, the maid who had worked for the Crale family for years. She was an enigma, quiet and observant, yet with an unknown past. Violet had been a constant presence in the house, but no one knew much about her history. As they sat with her, Poirot's eyes never left her face. "I know you worked for the Crales for many years," Poirot began, his voice warm yet probing. "You must have seen much, Madame Marsh. The life of Amias Crale, his relationships, his dealings." Violet looked at Poirot, her expression unreadable. "I've seen many things in my time, but what I know about Amias, well, some things are better left forgotten. People think they know the truth, but they don't. They never do." Carla leaned forward, her voice tense. "What do you mean? Did you know something that could change everything?" Violet's lips curled into a faint smile, but her eyes were cold. "I know more than you think, Mademoiselle Crale. But knowing something doesn't always mean you should speak of it." Poirot's gaze never wavered as he leaned forward, his voice a whisper. "You are a woman who knows the power of secrets, Madame Marsh. And sometimes, secrets are the deadliest weapon of all." Cliffhanger ending. As the conversation wound down, Poirot's mind was buzzing with all the new information. Each person had a motive, a reason for wanting Amias dead. But nothing quite added up. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, and it was only a matter of time before they could see the full picture. Carla's heart raced as she looked at Poirot. "What do you think? Who did it?" Poirot's eyes were thoughtful, almost distant. "Ah, mademoiselle, this case is like a labyrinth. One wrong turn, and we will be lost forever. But there is one thing I know: the truth is never as simple as it seems." Just as they were about to leave, a servant hurried toward them, breathless and pale. "Monsieur Poirot," he stammered, "there's been a discovery. You need to come quickly. The body of another person has been found." Poirot's gaze snapped to Carla, his expression darkening. "Another murder. It seems someone is desperate to keep their secrets buried. But this will only make things more interesting." The scene ended in chilling silence, as the weight of the revelation settled over them like a storm. A new victim, a new twist. The game was far from over. And Poirot knew this time the stakes were higher than ever. The midpoint. The clock ticked relentlessly in the silence of Poirot's study as he sat hunched over a collection of paper-sold letters, photographs, and records from the Crale family. The walls of his temporary office seemed to close in, each piece of evidence heavy with the weight of untold secrets. Carla sat nearby, her eyes fixed on him, her face a mirror of both hope and fear. Poirot had been quiet for some time, his brow furrowed in deep thought. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached for a faded envelope he had just discovered, tucked away inside one of Amias's old sketchbooks. The letter, yellowed with age, was written in Amias's unmistakable hand. Poirot's fingers hovered over it for a moment, the sense of something crucial slipping just out of reach. He unfolded it gently, his eyes scanning the words. "The truth is not as simple as it seems. There is a revelation that will shake everything. Some will rejoice, and some will fall. The last few words of the letter were torn, as if someone had violently ripped it, leaving behind only the remnants of a cryptic message. Poirot's sharp gaze flickered to Carla, who had been watching him intently. "What does it mean, Monsieur Poirot?" Carla's voice was thick with urgency. Poirot didn't immediately answer, lost in his own thoughts. The phrase "fall" lingered in his mind, echoing with an ominous warning. The more he read, the more the case began to unravel, like a tightly wound rope loosening with every turn. There was a pattern here, a trail of hidden emotions and betrayals that had been buried for too long. Poirot placed the letter down gently, his hand steady despite the growing tension in the air. "Mademoiselle Carla, the past does not simply fade away. It lingers, like a shadow that cannot be shaken off." They continued their investigation, but Poirot's mind was racing. Caroline, Amias's wife, was she truly the only one who had reason to kill? As Poirot dug deeper into the history of the Creole family, things became murkier. It seemed there were more players in this twisted drama than he had first suspected. The next revelation came when Poirot interviewed Elsa again. This time her demeanor was different, more fragile, as if a weight had settled heavily on her shoulders. She sat in the same chair by the fire, her fingers twisting nervously around the rim of her wineglass. Poirot, ever the patient investigator, leaned forward. "Mademoiselle Elsa," he began, his voice calm but edged with a quiet intensity. "There is something I must know. Was Amias truly yours alone? Did he share his affections with others?" Elsa's face paled, and for a moment her eyes darted away, as if the question had struck too close to a wound she had been trying to forget. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke. "Do you think I didn't know?" she asked, the words sharp but tinged with pain. "I knew about Caroline. I knew about all the others. But I loved him, Poirot. I loved him more than anything in this world." Poirot's gaze never wavered, his mind piecing together the fragments of Elsa's confession. "And did he love you?" he asked, his voice steady but probing. Elsa closed her eyes, her lips trembling. "He promised me. He promised we would be together, but he never did. But that's not why I wanted him dead. No, Poirot. There's something you don't know." Poirot leaned in, sensing the shift in the conversation. "What is it, Mademoiselle Elsa?" Elsa hesitated for a moment, her face contorting with emotion. "I was pregnant with his child," she whispered. "I was carrying his baby when he died." The room seemed to still as Poirot absorbed her words. This was the piece of the puzzle he hadn't anticipated. Elsa had been carrying Amias's child. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Why hadn't she mentioned this before? And why had she been so evasive? Carla's face turned ashen as she took in Elsa's confession. "You were carrying his child, and yet you didn't say anything," she whispered, barely able to comprehend the depth of the betrayal that had just surfaced. Elsa's eyes darkened, filled with a mixture of sorrow and regret. "I didn't want anyone to know. Not after everything that happened. It's not just about the love I lost, it's about the lies, the deceit, the things that were hidden, even from me." Poirot's mind raced as he connected the dots. A woman in love, a lover betrayed, and a child that could have been the heir to everything Amias held dear. Could Elsa have killed Amias in a fit of jealousy, driven by the fear of losing him forever? But as Poirot pondered this, a sudden realization struck him. It wasn't just Elsa who had a reason to kill. Philip Blake, Amias's closest friend, had been keeping a secret of his own, his obsession with Caroline, Amias's wife. Poirot had already sensed the underlying tension between the two men. Philip had always resented Amias's success, but was there something deeper at play? Had Philip been hiding his love for Caroline all along? And if he had, was he capable of murder to keep her for himself? Just as Poirot was beginning to connect these dots, a sudden event shook the investigation to its core. Poirot was walking back to his temporary residence, Carla by his side, when he noticed a shadow following them in the distance. He paused, instinctively reaching for his pocket watch as if something wasn't right. His eyes scanned the area, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Before he could react, a figure lunged at him from the darkness, knocking him to the ground with surprising strength. Carla screamed, but Poirot quickly regained his composure, using his sharp mind and reflexes to fend off the attacker. With a swift move, he managed to disarm the person, pinning them to the ground, but the figure wore a dark cloak that obscured their face. As Poirot's hand gripped the cloak, the figure managed to wriggle free and vanish into the night. As Poirot stood, his heart pounding, he caught a glimpse of something clutched in the figure's hand, an envelope. His eyes narrowed as he examined it, and on the front, written in a hasty scrawl, were the words, "Stop now, Oregon Moore will die." Poirot's gaze hardened, his mind now fully engaged. Someone was desperate to stop him from uncovering the truth. And as he stared at the empty street where the attacker had vanished, he knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back now. Cliffhanger ending. Poirot held the letter in his hands, the weight of the warning sinking in. "This is no longer just about Amias Kral," he muttered, his voice low and filled with intensity. "This is about something much larger, much more dangerous." Carla looked up at him, her face pale. "What do we do now, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes were filled with resolve, his voice steady. "We continue. We must. The truth must come to light, no matter the cost." As they turned to leave, the distant sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Someone was still watching, someone who would stop at nothing to ensure the secrets of the Crale family stayed buried. And Poirot knew that the most dangerous part of the case was yet to come. The final act. The atmosphere in the Crale mansion was thick with anticipation, the weight of the mystery pressing down on Poirot and Carla as they made their way up the creaking stairs to the attic. The air was musty, suffocating with dust and old memories. The flickering light of Poirot's lamp cast long, haunting shadows on the forgotten treasures piled around theme-old trunks, faded furniture, and forgotten relics of a family long gone. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the room, his mind already piecing together the final fragments of the puzzle. Carla followed closely behind, her face taut with worry. She had been with him through the unraveling of this case, but now, with each passing moment, the tension was unbearable. The truth was close, but it was also more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Poirot moved with purpose, his steps deliberate. "You see, Mademoiselle Carla, when a case is this complicated, there is always a final clue, a last piece that reveals the entire picture. It often lies hidden, in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered." He moved toward an old, forgotten chest in the corner of the room, its wood warped with age. He knelt before it, and with a practiced hand, gently pried it open. Inside was a canvas, rolled up and carefully tucked away, as if someone had wanted to keep it hidden from prying eyes. Poirot's fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the feeling that he was on the verge of an earth-shattering revelation. He unfurled the canvas slowly, revealing a beautiful but troubling image, a painting of Amias Kral in his prime. The strokes were bold, capturing the essence of his passion and life. But as Poirot examined it more closely, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. Beneath the layers of varnish, he could just make out a signature that shouldn't have been there. Carla leaned in, her breath catching in her throat. "What is it, Poirot?" she asked, her voice trembling. Poirot didn't answer immediately. Instead, he peered closer, his eyes narrowing with realization. The signature was unmistakable. Philip Blake. Philip Blake. "But how?" Carla whispered, stunned by the revelation. "He's the one who—" Poirot cut her off, his voice low and filled with intense concentration. "No, mademoiselle, you are mistaken. The signature, it is not just a sign of ownership, it is a key to the truth." He stood up slowly, his mind racing as the pieces fell into place. The painting, hidden for so long, held the answer to the crime. The varnish had concealed not only the signature, but a much deeper secretone that Philip Blake had never intended to reveal. But now it was clear. This was the final clue that would expose everything. The room seemed to close in around them as Poirot turned to face Carla. "You see, Mademoiselle Carla, the murder was never a crime of passion, but one of desperation. Someone wanted Amyas dead, someone who stood to lose everything if the truth came to light. Carla's face paled as she pieced together the information. But if Caroline wasn't the killer, then who? Poirot paused, his mind weaving the final strands of the tangled web. It was never about love. No, it was about fear. A fear of losing everything. Amyas was a man with many secrets. But the most dangerous secret he carried was his desire to paint the world as it really was, the truth, raw and unfiltered. And that truth, it threatened more than just the people he loved. The realization hit Carla like a blow to the chest. She stepped back, her mind whirling. Philip? He killed Amyas. Poirot nodded slowly, his gaze steady. Yes, mademoiselle. Philip Blake, Amyas's best friend, harbored a secret passion for Caroline that he had never been able to let go of. But his true motive was not just jealousy. It was something far darker. The room seemed to grow colder as Poirot continued, his voice cutting through the thick silence. Philip Blake had always been resentful of Amyas's success, his fame. But when Amyas began painting portraits of Caroline, something inside Philip snapped. He couldn't bear the thought of Caroline falling in love with another man, especially not a man like Amyas, who had everything Philip lacked. Poirot turned toward the window, looking out over the estate, his eyes lost in thought. Philip had always been in Amyas's shadow, but now the shadow was too great for him to bear. He needed Caroline, and he needed Amyas out of the way. So he hatched a plan, a perfect crime, made to look like passion gone wrong. Carla's breath quickened as she realized the magnitude of the deception. But the painting, the signature, it was all part of his plan, wasn't it? To make us believe that Caroline was guilty. Poirot's eyes locked onto hers. Exactly. Philip staged the scene meticulously. The way Amyas's body was positioned, the clues that led us straight to Caroline, they were all designed to point to her. But what Philip didn't count on was your belief in your mother's innocence, mademoiselle. That belief, combined with the stubborn persistence of Poirot, has brought us to the truth. Carla's heart raced as she took in the enormity of what Poirot was saying. But before she could fully process the revelation, a sound echoed through the mansione. Loud, shuddering bang, followed by the sound of footsteps pounding through the hall. Poirot's gaze snapped to the door. "It is not over, mademoiselle," he murmured, his voice steady despite the growing danger. "Someone is trying to stop us from uncovering the truth. We must act quickly." Suddenly, the door burst open, and a shadowy figure appeared in the doorway. Philip Blake, his face twisted with rage. He was holding a revolver, his hand shaking as he pointed it directly at Poirot. "Stay back, Poirot," Philip shouted, his voice breaking. "You don't understand. No one can know the truth. No one can." Poirot stood still, his calm demeanor unwavering, as he faced the man who had orchestrated the entire tragedy. "Ah, Monsieur Blake," he said softly, his voice a mix of pity and resolve. "You are too late. The truth has already been uncovered." But Philip's face twisted into a maniacal grin. "You think you've solved it. You think you know everything. No one will stop me now." The sound of a gunshot shattered the silence, leaving Carla frozen in terror as Poirot stepped back, his eyes narrowed in shock. Cliffhanger ending. Just as the shot rang out, Poirot's figure disappeared into the shadows. The screen went black, and Carla's scream echoed in the silence. Had Poirot been struck? Was this the end of the great detective's investigation, or was there yet another twist to the story? The silence left only one question lingering in the air. Who would survive this game of deception? The grand estate was thick with tension. The once grandiose rooms now felt like a labyrinth of secrets, each shadow more oppressive than the last. Poirot stood at the head of the room, his back straight, his gaze piercing the faces of the gathered suspects. Caroline Crail, her face pale but determined. Elsa, who shifted nervously, glancing from one person to another. Philip Blake, his expression unreadable, but his body rigid with suppressed emotion. And Miss Violet Marsh, the quiet maid, who looked like a ghost haunting her own past. Poirot's calm demeanor belied the storm of emotions simmering in the room. It had taken him weeks, countless conversations, and hours of reflection to arrive at this moment. The truth had been hiding in plain sight all along, and now, as the final act played out, Poirot was prepared to expose everything. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the heavy silence, "we are gathered here today not only to seek justice, but to face the consequences of what has been done in the name of love, betrayal, and vengeance." The room was still, save for the distant sound of the wind howling outside. Caroline stood stiffly, her eyes wide, as if waiting for Poirot to reveal the impossible. Elsa seemed to shrink back, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, eyes darting nervously. Philip Blake stood with his arms crossed. Jaw clenched. He was a man of deep secrets, but would they remain hidden much longer? Poirot paused, scanning the room, letting the weight of the moment hang heavily in the air. He turned to face Caroline first. "Mademoiselle Creole, you have borne the brunt of suspicion long enough. You were the one who loved your husband, the one who was wronged, yet it is not you who is guilty. The real murderer. It was someone much closer than you could have ever imagined." Caroline's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Her voice was barely a whisper, barely holding together. Poirot's eyes locked onto Philip, who stood motionless in the corner. "Monsieur Blake, I have come to understand that you have been hiding in plain sight, playing the role of a victim when in reality you were the mastermind." Gasps filled the room, but Poirot wasn't finished. "You wanted Caroline. You had always wanted her, but she chose Amias. And in your jealousy, you twisted the truth to suit your desires." Philip's face drained of color. "What are you talking about, Poirot?" His voice was a strained mockery of calm. "You're mad. I have no Poirot interrupted him sharply, his tone unyielding. "Do not play games, monsieur. You were driven by your love for Caroline. Yes, but it was not mere love. It was the hatred of Amias's success, his life, his very existence. You resented him, not just for his relationship with Caroline, but because he represented everything you could never be, adored, accomplished, and above reproach." The room was silent as the truth sank in. Philip's fists clenched, but his eyes flickered toward the floor, unwilling to meet Poirot's gaze. Poirot stepped closer, his voice growing colder. "The letter, the painting, the carefully placed clues, all of it was a deception. You manipulated each of us, creating a web so intricate that even I, Hercule Poirot, was nearly ensnared by it. You framed Caroline to protect yourself. And when the investigation started veering too close to the truth, you nearly silenced me as well." Philip's mask began to crack. His lips trembled, and his eyes darted around the room, as if seeking an escape. "I had no choice. I couldn't let her go. I couldn't." His voice trailed off into a hollow, broken whisper. Poirot gave him a long, piercing look. "You see, monsieur, that is the essence of your crime. You believed you had no choice, but the truth is, you were driven by your own twisted sense of justice, your own distorted version of what you deserved." Philip opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He stood there, his body trembling with the weight of his guilt, as if the very walls of the mansion were closing in on him. Poirot turned his attention back to Caroline, his voice softening just a touch. "Mademoiselle, you have been wronged by the man who once called himself your friend. And while you were trapped in a web of lies, he was free to manipulate you, to use your love for Amias as his own justification for murder." Caroline's face crumpled, a tear slipping down her cheek. I never knew. I never imagined it would be Philip." Poirot nodded solemnly. "You never could have known. The man who wears the mask of a friend, who shares in your grief, can often be the one who holds the knife behind your back." Elsa was trembling now, her breath shallow. "But why? Why didn't you just leave?" Her voice broke with emotion. Philip's eyes flashed with something darker. "I couldn't let anyone stand in my way. Not Amias, and certainly not Caroline. She was mine, and I would do anything to keep her." A long silence followed. The storm outside raged against the windows, as if mirroring the tempest within the room. Poirot remained calm, his demeanor unwavering, even as the storm of emotions swirled around him. His gaze flickered to Miss Violet Marsh, who had been strangely quiet throughout the entire confrontation. But it was the last part of Poirot's revelation that struck the final blow. The painting you tried to hide, Monsieur Blake. It was never meant to be a clue. It was a symbol of your desire to erase Amias's legacy, to make sure no one would remember the truth. But you failed. As Poirot's words echoed through the room, it was clear that the revelations were far from over. The truth had been exposed, but it had come at a cost. The Crail family was forever scarred, their name irrevocably stained by betrayal and murder. Caroline, though innocent, would carry the burden of this tragedy for the rest of her life. Just as the room began to settle, a final, chilling detail was revealed. Poirot's voice, now tinged with something more somber, came again. The truth, ladies and gentlemen, is sometimes a burden no one can bear. But the real question is, who will carry it? As the room fell into an eerie silence, the door to the study creaked open once more, and footsteps echoed from the hall. Cliffhanger ending. A figure stepped into the doorway, silhouetted by the dim light from the hallway. The last face Poirot had ever expected to see. Miss Violet Marsh, the maid. Her face was unreadable, a cold smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I see you've uncovered the truth, Poirot," she said softly, her voice like ice. "But have you really? Or is there more that even you don't understand?" The room fell into a frozen silence, every eye turning toward Violet as she took a slow step forward. What was she hiding? Was she involved in something far darker than anyone had realized? "Philip Blake, it was your jealousy that killed Amias,"